Hadi, please tell me when it's live and if you're doing the countdown. Okay, I understand it's live now. I apologize, I didn't have the countdown today, but I wanted to welcome all of you. My name is Souza. I coordinate the Multi-Party Research Group, which stands for Multilingualism in Family, Religious and Educational Contexts. And we've been organizing these seminars, inviting people from other countries and from similar areas so we can create a dialogue. And today we have the topic of creating, interpreting and appropriating policies, reflections about educational contexts in Brazil, Chile and England. And in the next slide, we have how it is structured. So today we have 4 presentations of 15 minutes each. We are happy to say that today we're going to have the seminars in 4 different languages: Spanish, French, English, and Portuguese. We are also going to try to have subtitles. They're not perfect, but we hope they help some of you to access the information better. And also remember that we have a chat, and feel free to write comments, questions, suggestions in the chat during the presentations. And you can use any of those 4 languages to interact with us. In the next slide, I have the first presentation. So they are 4, but they're divided in 2 groups. So the first one is with Maximiliano from the University of Chile. Can we have Maximiliano just to wave at everybody? Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
And then we are also going to have Julia Slobodeicov from the Federal University of Goiás. There she is. And we are going to have Ludmila Kalasnikova from the University of Chile chairing the question and answer session. So thank you. The next slide shows the second part of the event, where we're going to have Rose Crossgrove from Goldsmiths, University of London in England. That's Rose. And then we're going to have Julyana Portugal from the University of Brasília. Juliana has just arrived. Nice to see you. And then we are going to have another question and answer session, this time chaired by Vali Litra from Goldsmiths, University of London. Thank you. And with no further ado, we're going to start. I'd like to introduce you our first presenter then in the next slide. And the first presenter is Maximiliano. Thank you. Yeah, there he is. So anyway, Maximiliano is a Chilean linguist currently pursuing a master's in linguistics with a specialization in English at the University of Chile, where he also earned his BA in linguistics and English literature with highest distinction. He serves as a research and teaching assistant in projects on language policy, linguistic change, and discourse analysis. His interests include critical multimodal discourse analysis, English language policy in higher education, and the social linguistics of internationalization. So thank you very much, Maximiliano. Now it's with you. Thank you.
Well, I'm sorry. Am I supposed to share my screen or my presentation? I'm sorry if because I sent it and yeah, I'm not sure. I guess I will Um, uh, uh, um, uh, uh. Okay, I will share my screen then. Okay, well, good afternoon, and thank you so much for being here. Today, I will present I have this presentation for you, which is titled Visualizing Language Policy Through the University Linguistic Landscape of Internationalization. It's the basis for a language policy in tertiary education. And the goal of this presentation is to share a conceptual, empirical, and diagnostic foundation for thinking about languages and how they operate within the University of Chile in particular, and particularly based on marked contexts of internationalization. Well, as we all know, the global context today, to begin with, it is important for us to recognize and to start this discussion situated within the broader global context of today's higher education, understanding that the worldwide trend for higher education is that it's undergoing significant transformations of rapid scientific and technological development, shifting geopolitical balances, and increasing interdependence of how knowledge is created, the production of knowledge. And also, finally, the deep digitalization and mobility of knowledge as well, in terms of how we create it, right? The transnational nature of knowledge nowadays. In the sense that these dynamics reshape how universities learn, teach, do research, and also collaborate. In that sense, we frame ourselves in the concept of university internationalization, that Knight defines as the process of integrating an international, intercultural, or global dimension into the purposes, functions, and activities of university work. There's also a further distinction made between two streams of internationalization, which is abroad and at home, as we probably know. And as such, Bonaccina Puig as well recognizes that internationalization has become one of the main axes of institutional strategic development, right? In that sense, when we understand language when we add language into the formula, we understand that these function as bridges for knowledge production. In the incorporation of languages into university, plus the expanded access to knowledge sources, will always lead to intercultural mediation, to access to academic communities, and plural production and circulation of knowledge, right? And ultimately, it will allow us to contribute to the development of critical, collaborative, and intercultural skills for all the students within a particular institution. Internationalization in Latin America in particular, we can see that has trended or has been expanded quite significantly in recent decades. And it's often driven by the desire to enhance institutional quality, global visibility, and competitiveness, right? However, even though this growth has typically has been noted to be so significant, it has relied on an implicit model of internationalization, one in which often English emerges as a symbolic linguistic value and becomes the default gateway to international participation. Critical studies, at the same time, show the persistent structural challenges across the region within countries such as Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Chile, Ecuador, and Mexico, in the sense that there is limited linguistic competence a lot of the time, insufficient teacher preparation, and a lack of locally grounded research and policy frameworks that allow these new policies to come into fruition. For our own purposes of the language policy that we're working on, we understand how language operates within educational institutions in a framework that understands three different levels, right? The macro, in which we have the state language policies and national regulations. The meso, which is constituted by institutional policies at universities, and the micro, which is sub-institutional initiatives, faculties, departments, and programs. As such, this multi-level view is crucial for us, at least, because language policy is never understood as an only top-down process, and it emerges from interactions across levels. Well, in terms of the language policies in Chilean education, we have a linguistic landscape that shows a wide variety of policies, but that most of them are not explicit, right? We have Spanish as the de facto state language. We have indigenous language recognized under the law, and finally we have the only foreign language policy historically has been centered around the English language through these two programs, and that at the same time are also a de facto or constitute a de facto language policy. In that sense, we for our conceptual grounding, really, we draw on several influential models. We have the Kaplan and Boldoff, which is a more classical planner-oriented language policy model. We have Spolsky's model, the tripartite model of practice, ideology, and management. Shaham is also a really important author for us because she understands hidden mechanisms and ideological forces in how they shape language policy. And finally, Johnson as understanding policy as a process, as a more chaotic process that doesn't necessarily focus only on the results that these represent, but rather on how they are always dynamic and changing. And he focuses a lot on analyzing de facto and unofficial mechanisms that are not necessarily recognized as language policy, but much more so as hidden, such as language tests, etc. These frameworks help us observe not only what institutions say about language, but also how languages are lived and distributed in everyday academic and university life. Here we have a breakdown of how Johnson understands some of these key concepts, the origin, the goals, the instantiation, and the type of policy that they represent in terms of top-down, bottom-up, overt, covert, explicit, implicit, and de jure or de facto. Well, in terms of the modeling of our particular language policy, we draw a lot on Spolsky's model, the triangle, Spolsky's triangle, and in that we understand that there are three main dimensions to language policy, which are language management, which are documents and norms of institutional use, language ideologies, which represent the beliefs and the ideologies around that people hold around language, and that also help shape language practice and also language management. And finally, language practices, which are just, for the most part, policies in practice. Well, in terms of the research design and our own diagnostic process within university, our study uses a mixed kind of exploratory descriptive methodology in order to capture both broad tendencies and also situated experiences. We use a quantitative component in an online survey. We have participants that range from students, exchange students, faculty, academics, and also staff. And the dimensions that we measured here are linguistic competences, uses of language in teaching, research, management, and communication, barriers and needs that arise, attitudes towards multilingualism, and finally, the use of technology, including AI, in relation to how language is distributed. In this sense, we draw a descriptive, statistic, and cross-category comparisons in the analysis of this particular component of our methodology. And on the other hand, we have a qualitative component, which comprises semi-structured interviews, wherein we have participants that range from key institutional actors, such as faculty, directors, and international relation officers, to also language program coordinators and even teachers. The objectives of these interviews is to deepen the understanding of linguistic management practices, institutional perceptions of the same people, and the strategic projection that these people may have in order to integrate them into the process of creating this language policy. This analysis allows for us to open a thematic coding aligned that also aligns with theoretical categories that we got from literature and from the first part of our investigation. Well, in terms of the languages that we found in university, we have that there is the university landscape consists of, for the most part, Spanish as the majority language and the de facto medium of instruction. We have also English as the second scale, which is understood as the de facto strategic language for international academic collaboration. We have Portuguese and other foreign languages, which are for the most part framed as instrumental languages used for complementary training and specific disciplinary contexts, which kind of allows us to understand this as a multi-level language use. Then we have sign language, Chilean Sign Language, which is the language of access, inclusion, and equity, and Mapuzungun, which is a heritage language tied to intercultural knowledge and identity of a particular group. In this sense, we understand that we have a functional multilingualism with a scalar and contextual hierarchies that depend on each academic unit in how these are distributed, right? In certain academic units, certain languages are more prominent than in others. Well, in terms of the objectives of our policy paper, we're based on the conceptual and empirical components. The policy paper aims to characterize the current landscape of additional languages at University of Chile. We aim to propose recommendations for an institutional language policy, promote also actions and normative frameworks for the community, make visible, also very important, the latent implications of language for academic and professional life, and finally serve as a mediator between de facto linguistic practices and also institutional policy development. Finally, the processes and projections of our current state. We're currently drawing analysis, a qualitative analysis of interviews. There is also an ongoing identification of patterns, tensions, and gaps in linguistic management, triangulation with quantitative data, with these more qualitative aspect of our investigation, and finally drafting the policy. Drafting the policy paper and integrating theory and diagnostic findings with further recommendations. In terms of projections, we have the definition of strategic axes for an institutional language policy, the development of operational recommendations. We also have to focus on internal validation and consultation processes, and finally, creation of a roadmap for implementation and monitoring. Well, to conclude, this project seeks to illuminate the linguistic dimensions of internationalization in higher education and seeks to approach it from a more contextualized angle in order for us to contribute to a more equitable, multilingual, and strategically aligned institutional future of this particular University of Chile. And that's all. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may ask.
Thank you very much, Maximiliano. It was really interesting to see how you presented this overall picture of what's happening in Chile and through your specific research as well. I'm sure people are going to have questions. I have some that I'll ask later. And I was wondering if Marie, please, can you put the slide about Julia? And then I'll introduce Julia to the public, please. Yes, no, next one. Excellent. So Julia Slobodeicov is an undergraduate student in English at the Federal University of Goiás. Since 2023, she has been teaching at the university's Language Center. Her academic interests include identity studies and literature. She recently completed a research initiation program analyzing the BNCC, which is, she'll explain better, but it's part of the Brazilian policy. It's described in Portuguese, actually, on the screen. And she does that by focusing on teacher identities and the concept of English as a lingua franca. So thank you very much, Julia. It's a pleasure to have you here. And it's with you now. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm very pleased to be presenting today. So my name is Julia. This is my presentation as said. So I am going to present today about means and the teaching of English with the focus as a lingua franca and also teacher identity. So to contextualize my research, this research was conducted for the research initiation program supervised by Professor Ana Beatriz, and this project aimed initially to focus on this document that is a normative, a policy document for education in Brazil, and to focus on Língua Franca. And later, I opened up the project to talk about further things related to identity as well. So to understand what is BNCC, which is this document I'm mentioning, it could be translated as a national curriculum guideline. So it's a guideline, a normative document that exists since 2015. It was created by the Ministry of Education in Brazil. 2018, we have a new version because there is a new program for high school years, and this policy document followed this new version. So this document provides guidelines for all school subjects from all levels of basic education, so elementary education and also high school education. This document requires that each subject teach something specific that relates to also abilities that students should have in these levels, and they separate the school subjects into curricular components. So something from 2015 to 2018 was some changes in the curricular component that, so this was the focus of my research, to make a documental analysis. So the curricular component where English was at in 2015 could be translated as modern foreign. 2018, it became only English language or just English. So in the previous document, they contemplated not only English, but Spanish or French or other foreign languages that could be taught in basic level education. But in 2018 change, it's only required to teach English in schools. So this already poses a really big difference and a really big change of how to approach the teaching of languages in schools. And with this change, also came the inclusion of the in the previous version. So this is the beginning of changes, and with that, I went to other paths to understand a little bit more about Língua Franca and also identities. So the objectives, the main goal was to analyze the content of BNCC, which is then this curriculum guideline, and the teaching and learning of English, and also to identify if there were any I could emerge when dealing with the perspective of English as a lingua franca. To do that, I used 3 different stages of the research. It is considered a qualitative research. The first step was the documental analysis I mentioned of BNCC. Then I went to Bibliograph Franca to understand what these concepts mean and how could they apply related to BNCC. And the last step were semi-structured interviews with teachers from the language center. These steps quickly to show how the research developed. Used for, oh my God, what happened? Okay, I wanted to mention some theory of identity. To start, our research was use English as a lingua franca. For this, I chose some most used authors. Of course, there are others, but for this context, I chose to talk about as a language that is in constant change because it is a hybrid language. It is moved and it is transformed by many people that use this language, and it is moved by the wish to communicate, which is something I think describes a language to be a lingua franca. And one of the characteristics more talked about, and the fact that this language does not have a specific owner or specific territory. And this concept is then presented in BNCC, in 2018 for British English and focusing English as a language of the world that many people use and does not have a specific owner. On Pierce's researches where many conflicts can happen, and it is in constant change. And also something that is very important for my research is that ourselves when we are using language, and also it talks a lot about how identities are also by power relations, and we can see that a lot in classrooms, especially in a classroom of a foreign language, thinking about the place of English Brazilian context, but also in the context of BNCC, because it poses English as this language that is important and very much used for the job. It shows a lot as well the power relations of English as this superior language that sometimes is something that is in the social context, and the place of Portuguese in the classroom as well. So these two concepts are very important for my research. And the interviews were conducted with six teachers from the Language Center of the Federal University of Goiás, and 3 of them are already graduated and 3 were still in graduation as we did the interviews. The questions were divided in 3 steps. There was an introduction for them to talk about themselves, questions about their identity, and these are focused a lot on questions about their beliefs related to the English language, and also Língua Franca. So what did they understand of Língua Franca, if they used this perspective, if they studied about this. So the questions were to understand how did they see this concept, and if they saw this concept here in the objective, to understand if and how they are using their own beliefs of English in their classrooms and how they are using ELF perspective. So I brought here some moments of interviews that I think are important and tell a lot about my results, which is that the teachers, when talking about English as a lingua franca, they say that they do not know a lot about this concept. Most of them reported that they never studied, or if they studied, it was not sufficient, it was not enough to teach a class using this perspective. However, when they were explaining about their beliefs, they talked a lot about how they believe that there is not a specific owner of English. They know how to use a lingua franca perspective, but they don't know about the theory. So one of the excerpts, for example, this first one that I have here, is a teacher saying that they don't believe in teaching a very normative and very specific English because the public, the students, are already in a space that is plurilingual. And they also state that English. And this is a statement that really shows that the teachers are the English in United Kingdom, for example. There is only these 2 types of English. They are detached from these perspectives. So you can see that they have this critical view. And And they also talk about their own beliefs, especially related of English, because there are many nations, there are many places where English is spoken, and there are many different circumstances where someone can be a native speaker. So they talk about that in this second excerpt I have here, a report that many of the teachers made, that they don't speak as a native, they don't want to, and they don't need to speak as a native. They have their own English, Brazilian, and this is a perspective that is research. So this is what I pose here as the results, that the changes were very exclude other languages from the curriculum guidelines, but also when including this ELF perspective, because as I could see in my research, this was not aligned with the curriculum of colleges. And we understand, some of the students, the teachers knew about this concept, but very superficially, and that we use this perspective for all classes. So it is something that was not aligned with the college, is that the teachers use ELF perspective not very deeply, but they understand what it is and they mostly use it and they have this vision, but they don't understand the concept. They don't know the theory and they don't feel safe. Most of them said that they don't feel safe, they don't feel secure in using this perspective, even already know some aspects of it, because there's also another point of the materials they use. So all of them are teachers in Language Center, and the Language Center at UFG uses an American material. Any other have this material, their identity, because types of English to classes. So it is something really interesting to see that even the materials are not a huge factors, and their beliefs speaks louder than that. So the conclusion I could have, there is a very big importance, a huge importance of the identities of the teachers, not only from the teachers, but also the students, because this was something that also the students reported, that the teachers reported, that the students say that. So the students come to class with this understand that they could speak as a Brazilian. So already this conflict in the classroom that is related to their beliefs and their identities, and even beyond documents that are normative, language policies that use guidelines to what to teach, what to study, even that is not enough to surpass the identities of the teachers and their decisions, because most of the classroom decisions are based on their decisions of what they think is important to teach of English. So not English as the most important language, the most powerful language, but English as a language that can show about many different cultures languages around the world, and also a regional focused English. And I think one of the other things that is very important about this deeper studies about moment, especially at the English course in UFG, we have this knowledge, we see this for a little bit, but we don't see this as deeply as we should when we are thinking that this is a concept that is included in a guideline of a national things that we should be teaching in the basic education. So I think this is the main contribution of my research, and I really thought it was interesting to see how even though teachers don't study profoundly about this, up using it because their identities and their beliefs speak louder each certain subjects, but also at the end of the day, it shows that teachers' decisions sometimes come really from their beliefs. And these are my references. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Julia. Can I ask you something? Is it you passing the slides?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so can you go back to the first one and just go through them slowly? Because I don't think that everybody managed to see them, just to have an idea of what you had before. Let's go back to the beginning. Yeah, so if you just go through them 1 second for each, and then, yeah, next one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. I also apologize because we are aware that there are some problems with the transmission, and that's unfortunately something that we cannot control, is the quality of the connections. And it could be, on any of the sides, could be my side, could be Julia's side, could be the university side. So that's something we do not have control. But I thank you very much, Julia. And I think that maybe some of the parts that we could not hear properly, we can then go to the question and answer session and ask you to clarify some of the things. Yes, but thank you so much. And I would like to introduce you now to Ludmila Kalasnikova, who will be chairing the question and answer session. Yes, so Ludmila holds a Master's of Education from the University of Daugavpils in Latvia and a Master's of Applied Linguistics from the University of Southampton in England. In her current role in the Online Education Office under the Vice Presidency of Information Technologies at the University of Chile, she is responsible for developing and implementing professional teacher training courses related to the internationalization of curriculum. Her research interests include EMI methodology and didactics, the role of English as a lingua franca in higher education, and the design of EMI teacher professional development programs. So I pass it over to Ludmila and ask you all again to contribute with questions and comments on the chat. And obviously, everybody here can participate in this discussion too.
Mm-hmm. Great. I would like to thank you, Julia and Maximiliano, for presenting their research and results. It's really great to see how young researchers conducting research and share their findings with us. To start our Q&A question session, I would like to comment a little bit about each presented topic and ask a question to the presenter. So we will start with Maximiliano. So Maximiliano presented the language policy brief that is we are working at Universidad de Chile. And from his presentation, we learned the linguistic diversity, linguistic landscape just of one university. Just to let you know that Universidad de Chile has 19 faculties, so it's a big university, and we have several operating languages, and they're also located and used in it at different scale, at different level. So that's why it can cause some challenges in adapting a language policy for one university, especially at Universidad de Chile. So my question to you, Maximiliano, how can we tackle this challenge? Because linguistic landscape of each faculty is different. Yeah, so different languages are used. You mentioned Spanish, English, Portuguese, and other languages. So how would you say, like, what type of policy we should define, and who and for whom, especially for Universidad de Chile, please?
Yeah, that is one of the questions that I think one of the main hurdles we've found so far, right? With when we've conducted interviews, for example, we find that a lot of directors of international affairs and language programs as well have a very deep-seated understanding of why language is important and what languages are important, but from a variety of perspectives in each one of these, right? In some of them, in some faculties, for example, in the Faculty of Medicine, we have a very prominent sense of sign language, for example. No, it's really, really important for them because they work with that. They have very specialized areas, and we do not know much about them, right? That is the main issue a lot of the time. So tackling this huge contextual situated diversity of university of each of these faculties realities, yeah, that's the main question. I would say that how we're trying to approach that is by precisely doing what we're doing, is by taking everyone's voice, or as many voices as we can, because it's hard. Some of the time it's hard to conduct interviews with people who are so busy as these people, as the key actors, institutional actors at least, and we're trying to find a way to make them, to create dialogue rather than silencing in any of these particular voices. We're giving all of them a perspective. We're putting everything into perspective, understanding that, for example, English holds a particular power within university. We have almost a cross-cutting implementation of English, at least at the undergraduate level, in terms of what it means. And we're trying to also let it be guided by diversity, inclusion, along with also this relevance of English that English brings to competitiveness, internationalization, and all of that. So I guess the main way that we're trying to tackle that is by communicating, by making everyone communicate with each other, because otherwise there is no way we can know what the others are doing, or for the other faculties to know what the other faculties are doing, or for them to know that we're conducting these or trying to implement this policy, this language policy, right? I'm sorry, it was a bit long-winded, but it's kind of hard. It's hard, right? It's a really convoluted topic. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much for your answer. I want to know if anyone from our group or our presenters have follow-up questions for Maximiliano to pose? Well, at the moment, I don't see any questions. So I wish you all the best with your project. I know it's the draft is going on, like it's still a working document, but you're putting things together. And yeah, I'm looking forward to see the final version. I think it will be prepared for around December, January. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yes. Thank you very much, Maximiliano. And now we will move on to Julia. And Julia was talking about teachers, identity change, and English and Lingua Franca, or ELF. Julia, I have some follow-up questions based on your slides. Unfortunately, connection was not very stable, so I just want to clarify some information before I will pose a question. So you worked with teachers, but could you specify which teachers participated in your research? English language teachers or content teachers?
So, and they were English language teachers of English as a foreign language for the Language Center at the Federal University of Goiás. So they don't teach in the basic context of education. They don't teach elementary or high school. It is a private language school.
So, as I understood from your presentation, they actually were very interested to use ELF and present ELF practices in the teaching. Yeah, so raising the confidence of using English. For me, I know that this was a very interesting change in identity because standard English correctness still constitutes, as the learning target, and the criterion for success, especially when it comes teaching or learning English as a foreign language. So a lot of learners or non-native English speakers see this as an ultimate goal. I need to be fluent. I need to be fluent as a native speaker. So now they are changing their perception. They are shifting this perception, and also it would be possible. It's possible because of unprecedented spread of English. That it's brought this reconsideration of many basic and well-established assumptions about language. Could you talk more about what kind of ELF principles are they following in their teaching? So it's changed the identity you mentioned, but are they implementing in how they implemented during their teaching through materials? Do they do adaptation? Do they raise awareness about variations of English or global Englishes? Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. So in my interviews, I asked them if they use different materials, especially because I was aware, because I am also a teacher at the Language Center, that the material is focused on American English. And when I asked if they use different perspectives, if they talked about different variations, many of them said yes. But I asked if they actually used materials or other sources for their teaching. And at least 4 of them from the 6 participants said that yes, they used different materials, and most of them used authentic materials. So excerpt from YouTube videos or vlogs of people that were actually using English in a casual way, and also people that were using English that is not especially from America. One of them actually showed me one of the videos that they used, which was a video of a person speaking English, Indian English, which was really interesting. And they used this material as a classroom activity. So not only as a material to show, but also to use actively. The students actively use this material as well. So this is something that is not required at the Language Center, but I can see that is important for the teachers, as they know about this perspective. They understand that English as a lingua franca, or English beyond just American and British English, is something that they value. So they actively bring this to class. So I think this was really interesting to note that it's not only on their perspectives when they discuss, for example, the myth of the native speaker, but also in their practices, their choosing of materials and the choosing of activities as well.
Yes, this is incredible. So I'm really, really glad to hear that you have such results, that teachers now also focusing on communication and probably intercultural communications. Yeah, so on the variety of alpha. Yeah, so we all bring a little bit of linguistic aspect into English and how we can communicate between the nations, and also raising awareness. Yeah, so how English can be used. This is great to know. Thank you very much, Julia, for your research. And I will just check if there are any questions. I think we're all done. Thank you very much, both presenters. Thank you, Max. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you for the presenters, and thank you, Ludmila, as well. I have many questions, many things I'd like to discuss with both presenters, but as we are in touch, we can do that in a different time, and we are going to move on. So thank you, Ludmila. And now we are going to have the second part of the event, and we are going to start with Rose Crossgrove. Yeah, there she is. So Rose Crossgrove is an educator, an author, and a researcher based at Goldsmiths, University of London. She is currently completing a PhD on representations and GCSE History curriculum policy in England, with funding from the South and East Network for Social Sciences Doctoral Training Partnership. A former secondary school teacher, she has worked extensively with schools, heritage sites, and national awarding organizations around curriculum assessment and hidden histories. Thank you very much for joining us, Rose. I pass the floor to you.
Thank you. Just going to wait for the slides to come up. There we go. Lovely. Excellent. So hopefully the subtitles will work. Excellent, good stuff. So I'm going to be talking a little bit today about part of my PhD and part of my approach to my PhD, and hopefully talking a little bit differently about translation and how we think about translation. But I'm aware that obviously lots of you are not necessarily familiar with the educational context in England, so I'm just going to explain very, very briefly. GCSEs are the last of our many, many national exams that you are required to take at school. They're taken at around the age of 16. The only subject you are required to take are English, mathematics, and some sort of science subject. Everything else is optional and can be taken in all sorts of different combinations. Unusually, our national exams are not set by government or by a central government body. They are set by 3 different organisations that are based in England and 1 organisation which is based in Wales, and you can choose from any of those 4 which one your particular school is going to take. They are, however, because they're not centrally regulated, there is a body that looks after that, which is called Ofqual, and the fundamental guidelines for what all of those organizations have to meet are set by the Department for Education. So even though they're not centrally set, there is a lot of government oversight and involvement in the way that they are created. Apologies to anybody who has worked in a UK context. You're going to get a bit of a jump scare. So this guy, Michael Gove, every English teacher's least favorite. In 2010, he announced that there was going to be a big change, that exams had got too easy, that we needed to go back to the good old days. We needed content, we needed rigor, we needed in history to return to our island story, with all of the implications and stop the trashing of our national past. So that's very much the context in which we found ourselves in a huge, massive educational reform in the early 2010s, with this narrative of our island story, English, very much English exceptionalism, and the heroes of the past as the big focus. So that was the context in which that I started looking into my research. When I'm thinking about translation, I personally like to think about it not as something that happens between languages, but as something that happens between contexts. And I'm going to give you an example and then talk a little bit about how that relates specifically to policy. This word you may not be familiar with. It's a French word, it's frulot. I'm going to give you a clue. If anybody is familiar with it, I would actually love to know if you've got a translation for it in your language, because it's not a very easy one to do in English. If I say tu es frileuse, if I want to be really, really literal, I can say, oh, you're sensitive to the cold, but that doesn't really get across the meaning of the word very well. If I want to find one word, if I want to kind of maintain that one-to-one translation, I could say you're psychosensitive, but that is not a word that most people would be familiar with, and it sounds very scientific, it sounds very formal. It's also a word which means different things in different contexts. So actually, it might be that I'm calling you scared, that I'm saying you're timid. And if I'm translating this, I need to make a decision, right? Which way I'm going to do this, the context that I'm putting it in. I can make that decision. And even if the original intent of my author was not to say that that person is timid, I can decide that I'm going to do that because I think it'll work better for the story that I am now creating, the way that I am now putting together the narrative that's happening. If I'm talking to my parents or to someone who's from my part of England, I would say you're nesh. And I'm really interested to see how the subtitles cope with that, which is a dialect word. It's actually a direct translation of frulot. It has exactly the same meanings of somebody that is wearing a jumper when it's 30 degrees out, or somebody that's a bit of a scaredy cat, a little bit nervous. But I can't use that word with even most English speakers because it doesn't work. It's not common, and it doesn't, even though it is the best translation, it's not one that is meaningful. So my argument when we're thinking about translation is always thinking about context. So with policy, this is a section from the Department for Education's GCSE subject content. And what happens when we get these kind of documents, which have some really complex, really vague intentions behind them, is that there is space as things move from the Department for Education through to Ofqual, through to the awarding organizations that create the exams, through to teachers. There is space to go, but did you mean that? And there are three main ways that people approach this. The first one is negotiating. So if we're looking at substantial and coherent, that might be a negotiation period where we go, okay, how big can I make this? How small can I make this for what I want to do? If we're negotiating, then there's an awareness that there's some change happening. If we're translating, we're making those changes very, very blatant. You know, when we're talking about translation, people are very aware that something has gone from one context to a new context, usually because it's in a different language. But in a policy context, that's still happening. Something that is designed for government then needs to be translated into something that is designed for people that create exams, that is then designed for teachers. So it may be that, you know, the words social, economic, political, religious, technological, military get translated in very specific ways, that we are then talking about a very particular idea of social. Maybe we're actually talking about economic and political as the same thing, but those changes tend to be quite obvious and they tend to be quite apparent. Appropriation is a much more interesting approach to this, where Sometimes we pretend that's what we meant all along. So if we're talking about the complexity of society, if we're talking about historical situation, I may be able to go, no, you always meant this. You meant this. I'm just, clarifying. Good example of this is the word woke. In its original context, that meant somebody that was aware, somebody that was engaged. But that word has been so thoroughly appropriated now that the people who use it in its original meaning are now the ones that are having to argue that that is what that word means. So these different ideas are really important when we're thinking about policy, because policymakers like to pretend that none of this happens, right? That we go from a very straightforward set of guidelines that are then just passed through people who add in some detail, and it goes to teachers, and everybody is following exactly the same idea in exactly the same way. And we know very well in practice that is not what happens, and that in each of these stages there are arguments, there are ways that people try to steer things in particular directions, whether they think to better meet people's requirements or actually to challenge the requirements they've been given while still sitting within the bounds of what they've been asked to do. So I like to think of policy in a very ethnographic way. For me, this is a culture, this is a group of people. It's often a very small group of people, and they all have their own intentions. They all have their own backgrounds. They all have their own institutions in which they sit, or their own individual aims. And so I like to look at policy in a way that can go into documents and to interviews, and to unpack what those positions were, what those cultural spaces were being occupied in, and how we get from the position that we had at the beginning, which was very clear, this conservative idea of the supremacy of England and, a wonderful progression through to the glories of modern life, and what then actually happened when we look at the curriculum that was developed. Highly recommend both of these articles. I've got them linked at the end if people are interested, for thinking about this from an anthropological lens and thinking about it from a historical ethnographic lens. So basically doing ethnography in the past. But essentially going really, really deeply into what people are saying and what that tells us about their intentions, and the ways in which those intentions then have changed what may have been the original intent from policymakers. And this hopefully gives us a pathway into being able to do this very deliberately. I'm going to give you an example. This is some data that I'm working on currently. In the current GCSE in history, they are required to do a long-term study. This is usually anywhere from 700 to 1,000 years of history. So it's a really big topic. And there are different topics within that to focus on, because obviously 1,000 years of history is too big to expect even a student to do for 25% of an exam. A choice, and a very interesting choice, which was made by all of the awarding organisations except the one in Wales, is to include migration as one of the topics. So the other ones are crime and punishment and medicine. So the third one, which is offered by most of them, is migration. So migration to Britain, or from Britain, or within Britain, and that's quite variable. It's a really interesting choice. At the time, we were getting a lot of negative press around migration, with a lot of talk particularly about migration from Eastern Europe. This is leading up to the Brexit vote, so this was a very contentious and public-facing topic at the time. So it's a really interesting choice that all of these awarding organisations have made to have this topic on migration. And if we think about Michael Gove and his island story, it's quite a blatant challenge to that idea of the island and the waters around it, and nothing can come and interfere with the trajectory of the glories of England. So this was in conjunction and often is fed into a project which happened called Our Migration Story. And interestingly, people took very, very different approaches. And that's the joy of having 4 different options to choose from, is you can look at them and go for quite a different point. This was a really interesting one. This is one of the boards. Theirs is titled Migration, Empires and the People. And they essentially turned around and said, if you're going to tell us we have to teach British history, we're going to include the empire. That is also British history. And that is not an uncontroversial point. So they've very much taken this idea of looking at it as England's, and it is England's, relationship with the outside world, the way that they have moved backwards and forwards in conquest, in migration, in war, and also in emigration. So this is the only one that has chosen to look at people leaving Britain, which is a very interesting, again, choice of, actually, it's not the case that everybody wants to come here. Sometimes people leave. We've also had different people that have then used this as an opportunity to bring in other organizations, so to bring in essentially another voice into this policy-making process. So this is the Black and Asian Studies Association, who have been working for, 30 odd years on improving the presence of Black and Asian history within the curriculum. And they worked with one of the boards to very much get some focus on particularly those aspects of migration of people of African origin in particular from a much broader period than is generally talked about here, and to change understanding of the reasons that people have moved to Britain and the reasons that people have stayed and the ways in which they were treated while they were here. This section, this was actually much later. So this board actually only introduced this about 4 years after everybody else, which was interesting in itself. But this came in 2021, so following a lot of pressure with that Black Lives Matter. So again, there is also that side of this that we need to consider in here. And they are very much looking at broadening our understanding of what migrant is. Migrant is defined in a very specific way in the media at this point. So this is taking a very obvious point to appropriate that word, to translate that word into a much broader understanding of voluntary, of forced migration, temporary migration, and internal migration. So really starting to look at movement in a very different way. For the final one, we've got, again, a real push of thinking about the variety of not just focusing on one particular group, but understanding the different kinds of people that have moved to this country at different points, the different ways in which that's been understood, and really starting to think about their experience. So they have taken British history there to focus on the history of the people that lived here in all of their infinite variety. So what we're seeing and what we're starting to understand from the way that we approach this is there's so many different ways in which something as simple as a requirement to do a long-term study in British history can then be broken down and then be broken down even further. And the work that I'm doing at the moment is trying to understand the ways in which this has been done subtly through an appropriative method where they go, no, you always meant this. So with AQA and their, no, British history always included the history of the empire, and the ways in which this has been much more blatant a translation where British history is then the history of the people of Britain rather than Britain as a political force. So hopefully that's been interesting, and I'll share some of the references if you'd like to have a look at the horrors that we had to begin with. The Department for Education subject content is still live, but I really do recommend the other articles to think a little bit more and to see where we are in terms of the way that we think about our approach to history teaching, and also the approach that we're taking to policy making and to understanding what actually happens and the conversations and the iterations that go backwards and forwards as things are translated and appropriated in their new contexts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rose, for presenting a different context to us. I think the previous presentations were on language, and you had language, but then focusing on the history curriculum, it brings a lot more food for thought. So thank you very much. And let's wait to discuss your presentation and the question and answer session. Now I move on to Julyana, please, Julyana Portugal. Julyana is a PhD student in the postgraduate program in linguistics at the University of Brasília in Brazil, where she did her master's degree in applied linguistics from the postgraduate program in applied linguistics. She has a degree in Spanish language, Spanish literature, and Hispanic American studies from the same university. She has been a Spanish language teacher for 17 years, working in basic and higher education. Her research focuses on language policies for teaching and learning Spanish in Brazil and critical applied linguistics. Thank you very much. Julyana has just finished teaching a lesson and rushed here to join us. So I really appreciate your effort to be here, Julyana. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Muchas gracias. Bueno, buenos días a todos. Me llamo Julyana Portugal. Soy estudiante de doctorado en la Universidad de Brasilia y profesora de español desde hace unos 17 años. Y hoy voy a presentarles un recorte de mi tesis doctoral que será defendida en diciembre de este año. Este trabajo se titula El ejercicio de la agencia política como acto de resistencia, la derogación de la ley 11.161 de 2005 y la enseñanza de español en Brasil. Es un gran honor poder compartir un poco sobre ella con ustedes en esta mañana. Cuando hablamos sobre la enseñanza de la lengua española en Brasil, observamos un recorrido verdaderamente inestable en las directrices educativas, sobre todo la fuerte creencia de que esta lengua no necesita ser estudiada dada su semejanza inicial con la lengua portuguesa. Sin embargo, en 2005 fue promulgada la ley 11.161, que se hizo conocida como la Ley del Español. Esta ley tornó la enseñanza del español obligatoria en el sistema educativo brasileño, representando la democratización de la enseñanza de las lenguas extranjeras en Brasil, al hacer obligatorio el estudio de una lengua muy necesaria en el contexto brasileño e históricamente rechazada. No obstante, de manera impositiva y arbitraria, en 2016 la ley del español fue derogada por la ley de la reforma de la enseñanza secundaria, que además de derogar la ley del español, tornó la lengua inglesa la única lengua de carácter obligatorio en Brasil, revelándose una verdadera política de exclusión. A pesar del nuevo escenario de exclusión de la lengua española de las mallas curriculares, esta política lingüística de exclusión reveló que parte de la comunidad civil se despertó para la comprensión de que la comunidad, las personas sin poder estatal, son importantes agentes en la interpretación y apropiación de políticas lingüísticas. Desde la derogación de la ley, alrededor del Brasil han tenido lugar actos de agencia política y resistencia, evidenciando una comunidad consciente de su papel interventivo como agentes políticos, como se demuestra en esta línea del tiempo. Aquí en 2016 nosotros vemos, ¿no?, que ocurrió la derogación. En este periodo ocurrió una intensa movilización por el regreso del español a los currículos y hoy estamos aquí con el español no obligatorio en las mallas curriculares. Todo eso demuestra claramente que los profesores, en este caso los profesores de español en Brasil, son los árbitros de las políticas lingüísticas, los decisores finales, una vez que son ellos los que las ponen en práctica, los que las ejecutan en sus contextos locales e institucionales. Esta comprensión de política lingüística revela un proceso de interpretación y apropiación no lineal por diversos agentes al transcender la estructura tradicional de una acción para una acción conjunta que envuelve diferentes agentes, múltiples agentes. Así, en esta investigación optamos por utilizar el vocablo apropiación en lugar de implementación, en la comprensión de que la apropiación es un proceso descentralizado en el cual múltiples agentes interpretan y se apropian de la política lingüística de numerosas formas. Con base en estas consideraciones, el presente estudio tiene como objetivos poner en evidencia la importancia de la agencia política en este contexto de resistencia, conceptualizar la agencia política en el campo de la política lingüística, demostrar que el ejercicio de la agencia política puede generar cambios frente a políticas lingüísticas impositivas, y con relación a la metodología se llevó a cabo un análisis documental de diferentes géneros textuales, tales como portales de noticias, reportajes y también publicaciones en las redes sociales. Comenzando un poquito entonces a hablar sobre agencia, en el campo de la política lingüística todavía hay cierta imprecisión con relación a la definición del término agencia. Durante considerable tiempo se creyó que en lo que respecta a las políticas lingüísticas, el Estado era el único agente capaz de intervenir en el rumbo de una política lingüística. Sin embargo, a partir de los años 90, emergió una nueva noción de agencia que retira el foco del Estado como el único autor intencional de políticas lingüísticas y positivas y lo transfiere a la operación de poder en diferentes niveles y contextos locales e institucionales. De esta manera, se puede considerar que fue a partir de los años 2000 que la agencia se volvió un elemento central en las discusiones académicas en los estudios de políticas lingüísticas. De este modo, a continuación les presento la definición que se propone en mi tesis doctoral sobre este vocablo agencia. Agencia es la capacidad que un individuo o un colectivo de personas posee con el propósito de ejecutar acciones de intervención, ya sean estas intencionales o no, frente a una necesidad real de adhesión, mantenimiento, modificación o resistencia a una determinada situación político-lingüística. Dentro de todo este contexto de movilización derivado de la derogación de la Ley 11.161, la movilización colectiva, sobre todo, ha logrado mucho éxito en contextos locales e institucionales, como asociaciones de profesores, movimientos diversos, y un movimiento específico, en especial, ha alcanzado gran visibilidad, así como ha obtenido mucho éxito en sus acciones de resistencia, que es el movimiento FICA español, que está conformado por profesores de universidades, profesores de escuelas, de estudiantes, o sea, un colectivo sumamente plural, resistiendo por el regreso de la enseñanza obligatoria del español. Este movimiento ha ejercido su agencia política de diferentes formas, resistiendo a la política lingüística de exclusión, como por ejemplo el estudio de leyes y documentos diversos referentes a la política lingüística, reuniones transmitidas por el canal del FICA Español en YouTube. Las reuniones están abiertas a todos los que quieran participar, proponer, sugerir, actualizar las acciones del movimiento. Contacto frecuente con políticos, mantenimiento activo de las redes sociales del movimiento, reuniones con asociaciones y organismos interesados en la enseñanza del español, entre otras acciones igualmente relevantes. De ese modo, a pesar de la exclusión del español de los currículos, la lengua española, la enseñanza de la lengua española se ha mantenido en el sistema educativo brasileño a través de políticas lingüísticas que han surgido de abajo hasta arriba, ¿no? En formato bottom-up, en vivo, también conocidas y llamadas en la literatura por políticas lingüísticas de resistencia o políticas lingüísticas horizontales. En otras palabras, son políticas lingüísticas concebidas, propuestas y ejecutadas por la sociedad civil, personas sin poder estatal. A continuación les muestro algunos ejemplos de las primeras políticas lingüísticas concebidas, propuestas y efectuadas por la sociedad civil que están manteniendo la enseñanza de español en la ausencia de una ley federal. Aquí tenemos algunos ejemplos. Los nombres, los títulos están en portugués, porque son títulos de las portadas, de los reportajes, de las noticias, como, por ejemplo, Projeto de Lei de Iniciativa Popular é aprovado na Câmara e o município irá oficializar a língua espanhola na rede de ensino. Aprovado o projeto de lei do deputado Anísio Maia, que garante ensino de língua espanhola na rede estadual da Paraíba. E assim temos também as outras, e não são somente essas, mas há outras que também já foram aprovadas. Así, en la ausencia de una política federal que obligue nuevamente la enseñanza de la lengua española en Brasil, son estas políticas de formato de abajo hacia arriba que actualmente garantizan que el estudiante brasileño tenga la oportunidad de estudiar español en la escuela. De igual modo, les muestro también una otra acción muy importante que ocurrió en este año, que fue el regreso del español al Programa Nacional de Libro Didáctico, PNLD, que significa que a partir del próximo año las escuelas públicas en Brasil contarán con libros de español a pesar del escenario de exclusión. Finalmente, también cabe destacar una otra acción política bastante relevante, creo que también un posible resultado de la agencia política de la sociedad civil, que es la resolución del Consejo Nacional de Educación número 5 de 2025, que instituye las directrices para la enseñanza de español en Brasil. Si bien no es una directriz de carácter obligatorio, se entiende que consiste en una forma de valorar el español en el contexto actual de exclusión. Luego, tanto el regreso del español al PNLD como esta resolución son ejemplos de políticas educativas benéficas que tal vez no serían posibles caso la comunidad civil no se manifestara. Aquí les presento un ejemplo de argumentación de la sociedad civil a través de las redes sociales. En esta publicación, específicamente, una persona etiquetó, aquí nosotros podemos ver, al ministro de Educación, Camilo Santana, e reivindicou: deixe o espanhol, veja os números referentes aos estudantes que optam pela prova de língua espanhola no Enem. Veja a contribuição sociocultural e linguística que a língua espanhola possui, junto à nossa cultura e à língua portuguesa. Desta forma, seguimos, ¿no? Nosotros que enseñamos la lengua española, nosotros que estudiamos la lengua española, nosotros que amamos la lengua española, una comunidad movilizada, intencional, argumentadora y, sobre todo, resistente. Aquí tenemos diferentes formas de ejercer la agencia política en las redes sociales. Esta es una parte del feed del Instagram del movimiento FIC Español. Y observen que hay varias publicaciones de diferentes tipos, como por ejemplo, esta primera hace referencia a la resistencia a través de la producción científica, como libros, artículos. Esta segunda ya es una publicación individual, de manifestación individual. Es el perfil de una profesora de español que hizo un vídeo en favor de la obligatoriedad del ensino de la enseñanza de español y etiquetó el movimiento. Aquí tenemos una otra manera también de resistir a través de las redes sociales, que es utilizar estas redes para compartir sobre documentos que son enviados a las instancias superiores, como por ejemplo oficios, peticiones, notas de repudio. Estas dos representan también publicaciones con vistas a concientizar, informar la comunidad, ¿no? Para que éste esté siempre a tanto de lo que está pasando, de lo que está ocurriendo con la enseñanza de la lengua española en Brasil. Y esta última también es un ejemplo de reivindicación pública de actos arbitrarios como la ausencia de la lengua española en la prueba nacional docente. Con base en estas consideraciones, es posible listar algunos resultados de este estudio. En primer lugar, el claro ejercicio de la agencia política, de la movilización de los profesores de español en la lucha por la permanencia de la enseñanza de esta lengua en los currículos desde la revocación de la ley 11.761 que ocurrió en 2016. Los resultados también evidencian que, aunque sea un componente curricular excluido, ¿no?, de la obligatoriedad en las mallas curriculares, el español resiste en el sistema educativo brasileño en diferentes contextos a través de políticas lingüísticas de abajo hacia arriba, ejecutadas por la sociedad civil. La agencia política puede ser ejercida de diferentes formas a nivel individual o colectivo, generando resultados concretos en contextos locales e institucionales. Y finalmente, y lo más importante, aunque muchos profesores se sientan meros implementadores de políticas lingüísticas impositivas, en realidad son importantes agentes en su apropiación, que tienen poder para intervenir en los rumbos de una política lingüística impositiva. Finalizó esta ponencia con este aula de la líder del movimiento FIC español aquí en Brasil, Mónica Nariño. Es importante que luchemos por la política lingüística. Hoy estamos luchando por el español, pero tenemos que luchar por todos los idiomas, para que tengamos las lenguas indígenas, para que tengamos las lenguas de señas brasileñas, para que tengamos el francés, el alemán, lo que sea. Pero es importante que luchemos. Muchas gracias.
I was muted. I even use my Spanish here to say muchas gracias. Eu vou falar em português agora, porque a Juliana não fala inglês. Então, eu queria te agradecer muito. Eu sei que hoje foi muito corrido para você e, novamente, eu repito que é uma honra ver esse esforço que você fez para estar aqui presente, para compartilhar o seu trabalho, que a gente já conversou muito, que é de suma importância. But now I'm going to pass it on to Vali. Vali Litra, please. And Vali will chair the questions and answers. Vali, Marie, can you put, yes, thank you, the information. Yes, that's the one. So Vali is a reader in languages in education and leads the MPhil PhD in education at Goldsmiths, University of London in England. Grounded in social linguistic and applied linguistic theory, her work examines multilingualism in language education and society in migration and minority contexts, with a focus on creating linguistically and culturally just learning environments for all. So thank you very much, Vali, to have you here. I hope that, I'm not sure if you speak Spanish, but I hope that the slides in English have been very helpful with the subtitles as well. So I pass it on to you so we can have a conversation about the last two presentations, please.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anna. And thank you to Rose and Juliana for their presentations, for sharing their doctoral research. We moved from London to Brazil. I'm going to take us back to the UK, to England. I was really struck by the commonalities of the two presentations. They were both looking at policy. They were both talking about the different agents and stakeholders in educational policy, with a focus on history in the case of Rosa's study, and the different stakeholders in languages and education policies in Brazil. So it was really interesting to see, and also some of the common terminology around negotiation and appropriation, and the interaction between the different levels of policy. So starting with Rose's presentation, I was quite struck by this concept of historical ethnography, Rose, and I wonder, for my benefit and perhaps for the benefit of those listening to us today, whether you could talk a little bit more about what is historical ethnography, and how is it, and how are you using it in your own study? What kind of participants, what kind of stakeholders are you working with? What kind of data are you focusing on?
Okay, very quickly then. So hopefully people have at least come across the idea of ethnography before. So traditionally in ethnography, you go and spend as much time as you are able in a place as an observer, which obviously never really works like that, because, you know, as an observer, you are changing your environment. Obviously, we can't do that in the past, but that leaves us a real problem, because it means, particularly with policy studies, where often you can't go and observe, you know, these are sensitive, these are government, these are protected, they're regulated, you can't get in. Even if you could get into those places, what you'd be allowed to report would probably be restricted. So we then find ourselves in a position where we can't really understand the culture, the people that are often very hidden, that are involved in these processes at the time. But we can use the same principles of trying to essentially reconstruct a culture, of trying to get that really thick description of the ways that we interact through the documents that are created, and if it's recent enough, through speaking to some of the people that were involved at the time. So I'm fortunate enough that, you know, I'm looking at things that happened sort of 10 or 15 years ago. So most of those people are still around. So I've been conducting interviews with people from the exam boards, with people that have consulted at varying different stages in that process, people that have looked to create and to distribute these, and basically what they thought they were doing, what their intention was, what they understood of the position that they found themselves in, and the ways in which they decided to go, okay, we'll meet that in our own way, or we'll do what we intended to do and work out how we can make that meet the requirements that we've been given.
That's really interesting. So the movers and the shakers,
yes,
really,
for sure,
of policy making, right? And when you read the documents that have been produced through these processes of negotiation and translation and appropriation, and then you interview them, are there alignments or disalignments between the kind of discourses or discursive positionings you find in the documents and then those that they share with you in your interviews?
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, the other side of this, and partly why I'm also looking this way, is I was at the periphery of some of this in the later parts of the process. So it's also allows me to bring in a little bit of what I know about what went on. So it's a combination then of they're explaining what they thought they were doing, but they're also then translating that through me, because they have their own preconceptions of where I was in that process. So they will talk to me about how heritage organizations are helpful. They will talk to me about exam creation, depending on what my context was for them. So not only am I seeing the kind of the ways in which they've managed to influence, though obviously there's huge amounts of people. It's, you know, there's no individual that has created these documents usually. There's a huge amount of people, so you can't trace one person's kind of influence through, certainly, but you can see where, when people are very clear about what their positions are, you can see the ways that has impacted on the ways in which they've decided to be quite blatant about the changes they've made, to be more subtle about the changes they've made in order to achieve the aims that they thought they were going for.
Right. Excellent. Okay. Thank you, Rose. I just want to sort of open the floor if there are any questions specific to Rose's presentation. I've seen the question by Aline, and Aline, we will try and answer it after we discuss Juliana's paper, if that's okay with you. Any comments from colleagues or students? I mean, Anna, I know that you're watching the time, so I don't want to take too much time. If there's any comments, okay. Let's maybe we can talk a little bit about Juliana's paper, and if we still have time, we can come back to Rose's. So yes, I mean, Juliana, I was really taken by your teachers, the Spanish teachers, as grassroots policymakers. It resonates a lot with my work, working with teachers, heritage language teachers, where the nation state and its role in policy making has decreased over the years. And teachers find themselves in a position where they can be creators of policy themselves. So I was very taken by your presentation. I want to ask you a question about the position of Spanish in the language hierarchies of Brazil, just for my benefit, but also for people who may not be familiar. What was and what is the position of Spanish? Sometimes a language may change, its position may change within language hierarchies. And also, when we talk about Spanish, is it a particular varieties of Spanish that we're talking about? So can you maybe unpack a little bit the Spanish language in Brazil for us?
Lo siento, estoy esperando la traducción de Ana, pero comprendí un poquito, ¿sí? Solo que prefiero esperar la traducción para que sea asertiva en la respuesta. Entonces, solo un ratito, ¿sí? Que voy a esperar por
we
Ana.
can't see the translation yet. So, is it possible to have the translation back on? Otherwise, Anna, you'll have to mediate here. Because
No sé.
Sorry, let me just. I think. Oh, it's only for the slides, says Rose. Okay, that's okay. Juliana, you can answer for the benefit of our audience.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias.
Okay, go ahead. And maybe Anna can do a little summary afterwards. Sorry, Anna, for putting you on the spot. Go ahead. So, Juliana, you can go ahead.
Sí. Estoy esperando la traducción. Lo siento. Sí, pero I don't speak English.
It's okay. I don't know if the translation works or if it only works for the slides. So don't worry. You can explain to us, and then Anna might do a little summary of what you said in English. Okay, so don't worry. Thank you. Thanks, Anna.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Juliana, I sent you Juliana, eu te mandei os áudios pelo WhatsApp da tradução. Você consegue ouvir o áudio?
Sim, ai. Claro,
Escuta o áudio enquanto eu explico o que eu fiz, tá bom? Now, it's because I have sent Juliana the audio via WhatsApp. But so I was speaking to both of you, but because I was not on, you couldn't hear me. So she'll listen to the messages now, and then she will answer you. so sorry, I've sent her. As you were speaking, Vali, I was translating and sending to her, so she has got 4 short audios, but
Perfect.
I think she was trying to understand the English first, so I ask everybody to bear with us while she listens to the messages,
Fine.
and then she will reply. Yeah. It's probably good to know that Julyana just submitted her thesis yesterday.
Wonderful.
So she will be having her viva in about a month's time.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So
Listo,
lots of-
ya escuché. Así que posible puedo responder, puedo contestar. Muchas gracias, Vali, por tus consideraciones. ¿Quieres hacer la traducción simultánea, Ana? Como quieras.
Yes, thank you very much, Vali, for your considerations.
Que me quedo muy contenta por tu
Estou
área de
muito
investigación.
contente
Por tu área de investigación ser las lenguas de herencia.
por sua
No-
investigação sobre língua. Sorry, speaking Portuguese now. She's really happy about your research, Vali, on heritage language.
Sí, y muchas gracias por tus consideraciones sobre mi trabajo.
Thank you
Tu
very
pre-
much about your
Tu pregunta sobre
comments
la-
about my work.
Tu pregunta sobre la
asked
importancia del
about
español,
the
la
importance of
jerarquización
Spanish.
del español es muy importante. Porque creo que internacionalmente, eu acredito que internacionalmente as pessoas precisam conhecer a importância do espanhol e o valor do espanhol enquanto língua estrangeira.
I believe that internationally people need to learn about the importance of Spanish as a foreign language.
Desculpa, Ana, eu estava respondendo em espanhol, perdão.
Não, pode ser. Estou achando ótimo praticar meu espanhol.
Não, maravilhosa. Em primeiro lugar, a língua espanhola
First of all,
é a
Spanish
segunda
language
é a segunda língua mais falada por número de falantes nativos no mundo.
is the second language most spoken by native people in the world.
É uma língua falada por 21 países ao redor do mundo.
It's spoken by in 21 countries around the world.
No contexto brasileiro, especificamente, é uma língua muito democrática, principalmente as classes baixas.
In Brazil, especially, it's considered a democratic language, especially for low-income social class.
Uma vez que não são todos os estudantes brasileiros que sabem falar a língua inglesa.
And it's because not every student knows how to speak English.
Então, ainda que a semelhança entre o português e o espanhol inicialmente possa criar algum certo atrito, possa até desvalorizar o estudo da língua, de certa maneira é um acesso aos cursos de nível superior.
Because although initially Portuguese and Spanish, for the two languages being too similar to each other, sometimes people reduces the importance of learning Spanish. It's actually a way of giving access to higher education to the students who could not study English, who did not have resources to study English.
Então, nesse contexto de revogação, né, do espanhol não ser mais uma língua de estudo obrigatório, o mais interessante, como a gente comentou, como eu comentei, é ver essa fortíssima mobilização da comunidade do espanhol.
What she considers really important is the fact that, in consequence of the cancellation of the law in obliging of making Spanish compulsory, because it used to be one of the languages in the Brazilian educational system, it's really important to see how people got mobilized to actually do something about it.
Isso é uma demonstração claríssima de que, de fato, os professores, os alunos, a sociedade civil como um todo realmente são agentes importantíssimos no processo da política linguística. E os professores, os decisores finais, porque são eles quem implementam essas políticas linguísticas nos contextos institucionais e locais.
It's a demonstration of how powerful teachers and civil society are in terms of language policies. I'm summarizing because
That's okay.
she's just talking too much and I lose what she said before. Sorry, I'm not a trained interpreter.
Ai, obrigada, Ana.
Juliana, mas uma coisa que a Vale queria saber é como é que é talvez um pouquinho da história do espanhol, da posição do espanhol historicamente falando dentro do Brasil.
Ah, legal.
I'm just
Então,
repeating your question, Vale, about the situation of Spanish in Brazil.
Ah, sim, perdão, eu acabei não pegando essa nuance. O espanhol, enquanto componente curricular no Brasil, ele apresenta um histórico muito instável no Brasil. A gente comenta que é a política do tira e bota.
The situation of Spanish is very unstable, and as you're saying, they call it as the politics of putting it in and taking it out.
Então, é uma história de idas e vindas, né? O ensino de espanhol no Brasil remonta a mais de 100 anos de história.
It has over 100 years of history in Brazil, but in different situations depending on the time in history.
Tendo começado em 1919, no período imperial.
1918, it started. Ju, I'm going to ask you to be short. Eu vou te pedir para ser rápida, porque a gente tem um pouquinho tempo para encerrar, tá bom?
Ah, tá bom.
História de 100 anos em 1 minuto.
Desculpa. Então,
100 years in a minute, please.
Então, eu acho que o mais importante é a gente entender que esses 100 anos de história, eles foram fortemente afetados por motivações políticas, econômicas e sociais, mostrando que, de fato, a política linguística é sempre afetada pelo político.
Economics have affected the situation of Spanish along all those years. Yeah. So I think we're going to stop there. Basically, for you to know, Vali, that it is present, and depending on the government, it's more present or less present. And recently, it was part of the curriculum as an optional language at the same level as English, but just recently, it has been taken out of the curriculum, and that's what has led to Juliana's study.
But my understanding now, it's been reintroduced because of all the campaigning, but not
It has been reintroduced by bottom-up policy, so people on the ground taking actions to make sure that Spanish is still there in the educational system, but not from top down. It's not officially, but some people are taking action to make sure that it's still there.
Yeah. It's fascinating, and I wonder, something for us to think about, this mobilization by Spanish language professionals and their, professional bodies, whether this is something that can be replicated for other language communities.
Ela está dizendo que acha isso muito interessante. Okay, now I'm just going to say. Ela está dizendo que acha isso muito interessante, essa mobilização toda do espanhol, e que talvez seja um exemplo para que outras línguas também se organizem da mesma maneira.
Ah, com certeza. Com certeza, a mobilização no Brasil foi muito forte. Então, concordo.
But I gotta thank both of you because of time. We have 3 minutes to finish. So I think there is a question from Aline.
Yes, that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, so go on, please. Yes.
There is a question from our audience, and I think any one of our speakers may respond to it. And the question is, does the rise of new conservatism in countries like the United States affect how foreigners feel about using their accents or expressing their cultural identity when speaking English? So I don't know if our speakers would like to reflect on their context, their national context, or whether they're familiar with other contexts, other cultural contexts. So basically, it's a...
Hi, so I'm going to comment on this question.
Yes, please.
In my context, there I teach English in the language center. I believe this is something that students always bring to the classroom. how they want to speak as a person from that country. So usually the role model is United States. So I want to speak like an American. I want to have a native speaker accent. So this is something that has always happened, but I think maybe is a possibility that can grow because of this new conservatism. And I think the idea that there is no space for diversity, especially related to United States, that we know that it's in a very critical political moment. I believe this is something that people want to not show so much their accents a lot lately because of this, because of maybe looking like a foreign person and this not being seen with good eyes anymore. So I think this is something that can worsen, but it's already a reality. Many students come with this perspective to the classroom.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Rose, would you like to
So
comment?
obviously very different with people generally moving into what is an English-speaking context. We see this for us has been a long-standing problem, and the policy approach that we have here, if you arrive after the age of 11, there's no support for you, because the way that we define English as an additional language speakers is just speaks a language other than English at home. So if you're bilingual from birth, you still count for the statistics. And that means essentially they do well on exams because bilingual kids do better. So we're in this odd situation where we have this really rapid loss of accent that tends to happen within 3 or 4 years, because obviously you're immersed, you're hearing whatever the accent of the area you're in every day. And kids try to lose it very quickly because, particularly depending on the perception of their home language, their cultural identity, they're really trying to change that perception. And you get a really odd situation. I used to teach in East London, and second generation Bengali kids would make fun of more newly arrived children for a freshy accent, fresh off the boat. And you get then this cultural stacking, whereas we used to have, again, Bengali origin, but via Italy, and they're wandering around speaking Italian in the corridors and they don't care. And it's so also entrenched in the hierarchy of where their cultural identity and where their language sits. If you're a French speaker, people are probably going to make fun of you because we have a cultural thing there, but it's in a different sense. If you speak a Western European language, there's not going to be the same pressure potentially to lose that accent as there are from people who are coming from South Asia or from other parts of the world, where because of the perceptions around asylum seekers, around immigrants from those parts of the world, we're seeing a real desire to lose the accent to fit in as much as possible. But I would not say this is a new thing. You know, our school system has been very assimilatory ever since really, but particularly since we've had a national curriculum. So we're talking, you know, since the late 80s.
Great, thank you. Thank you both very much for bringing in your perspectives from different contexts. Do we have any other questions? I think Anna is going to take the floor now to close our session today. So over to you, Anna.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Marie, can you put the slides back on, please? And here's the next one. So actually go back, please, the one in blank. Yeah. So generally, I would like to thank everybody who has been following us online, for the people who were present face-to-face at the Federal University of Goiás. And obviously thank all the presenters and the chair people that made this event possible. And I hope that we continue these conversations. And so please feel free to contact any of us via email. And if we can go to the next slide, I think it's also very important to thank the people who are behind the computer trying to help us. So I thank Thiago Santos, who's the person who's responsible for the chat, and Mariana Soares, who's responsible for the live transmission today. Both of them are English students at the Federal University of Goiás. So thank you very much for all your support before and during the event. And the next one, I also thank Natasha Morado for doing producing all the marketing materials. Owen, who is the one who will be writing, issuing all the certificates for the people who sign the attendance list. Maybe Thiago run the attendance list again now on the chat, just to make sure that everybody has signed it so they can get their certificates. And there is one more person I'd like to thank in the next slide, who is Luciano. I always thank him because these events are only possible because he's the one who has taught all of us how to use the technology. So, and the next one, please, next slide, is just ready to close the session. Thank you again, and invite you to visit the Multifari site for the research group if you're interested in knowing more about what we do. And thank Ludmila explicitly for helping us with the contacts in Chile, and Vali for actually organizing this event in partnership, in collaboration with us, and representing Goldsmiths, University of London. So thank you all, and I hope to see you in the next event next semester. You have another one. Okay, thank you. Bye bye for now.